Sofía walked out of the meeting room with confident steps, though there was a flicker of exhaustion in her eyes. The meeting with the Japanese investors had just ended, a key milestone in her career at one of Buenos Aires' top financial firms. The numbers, forecasts, and investment strategies had all been presented smoothly, earning her boss, Mr. Martin, an approving nod throughout. When the room broke into applause, Martin openly praised her in front of everyone. "Your professionalism and problem-solving skills are truly impressive," he said. "You're exactly who we need to lead this major project." On the outside, she was the image of a successful, decisive woman. But inside, Sofía carried a weight she couldn't put into words. The pressure from work loomed like an invisible burden, preventing her from fully enjoying her accomplishments. Every day, she balanced her responsibilities at the company with her role as a wife and daughter-in-law in a traditional family. The fatigue and stress slowly built up, seeping into her thoughts and actions. The glamorous city of Buenos Aires could not soothe the tension that gripped her soul. Her life stood at a crossroads. On one side, a thriving career. On the other, a family riddled with conflict and growing emotional distance. And Sofía knew every decision she made from now on would affect not only herself, but those around her. Just as she stepped into the house, her phone rang. Her mother-in-law's name lit up the screen, Mercedes. The older woman's voice crackled through the line, heavy with reproach, thickening the air in the room. "Sofía, have you even thought about having a child yet? Diego can't spend his life just working. You need to understand him, not just focus on your career." Her tone was firm and tired, like a judge in a trial from which there was no escape. Sofía wanted to respond, to explain, but the words sat like stones on her chest. She felt trapped in a silent whirlwind. She didn't want another argument, but every word from Mercedes cut like an invisible knife, not just reproachful, but dismissive, loaded with unspoken expectations that made Sofía feel like a stranger in her own home. Her husband, Diego, wasn't much help either. He traveled often for work and came home looking exhausted, but never offered comfort or support. The silence and growing distance between them only deepened her pain. Sofía understood that he was under pressure from his mother too, but that only made her feel more abandoned, less seen. Every phone call, every visit from Mercedes was like another blow to Sofía's heart. The nameless responsibilities and invisible expectations were pushing her to the edge. Anxiety began to creep in, planting seeds of doubt and a loneliness deeper than she had ever known. One late evening, as the city lights of Buenos Aires faded behind the clouds, Sofía received a text message from her mother-in-law. The words were short but sharp. "Think of Diego, Sofía. Don't let this family fall apart because of things you refuse to face." It wasn't just a reminder, it felt like a warning. And it pushed Sofía further into isolation. Inside her, tension and insecurity kept building. Mercedes' words fell like icy stones, cracking the fragile wall that still held her connected to Diego's family. A powerful urge began rising inside her, the need to find peace, to escape the pressure, to breathe again in a marriage that was beginning to feel suffocating. She began to realize it wasn't just work or her role as a wife and daughter-in-law that drained her. It was also the emotional distance between her and Diego, the man she once trusted most. In the emptiness of their relationship, where there was no longer mutual understanding or support, Sofía found herself yearning for something different. For a change that could heal her wounded spirit. The pressure from Mercedes, the growing coldness of Diego, and the suffocating feeling inside her own home became the driving forces behind Sofía's desire for something else, a way out, even if she didn't yet know where it would lead. The uncertainty in her marriage clung to her like a shadow, gradually reshaping her thoughts, her emotions. After being promoted to Martin's right hand, Sofía had to work even harder to maintain her professional image. But amid her boss's praise and her career success, rumors began to spread. Whispers snaked through the office that Sofía had climbed the ladder by sleeping with the boss. The malicious gossip stabbed at her sense of dignity. Even though she knew the rumors were baseless, Sofía couldn't shake the feeling of being alone, judged, scrutinized under a harsh spotlight. Every day, she fought to protect her reputation and her career. But the invisible weight of the workplace's toxic environment wore her down, filling her with doubt and exhaustion. The sidelong glances, the hushed voices behind her back, it all made her realize that loneliness wasn't confined to her home. It was present even in the place she once thought was her safe haven, her office. That loneliness grew, fed by feelings of being misunderstood and losing faith. She began to ask herself, was she still seen as a competent, successful woman? Or just a tool used to achieve someone else's goals? Each day, she fought to prove her worth, yet felt increasingly lost in a sea of suspicion and gossip. The pressure at home only intensified. Mercedes began visiting more often, her criticisms relentless, always about having children, always about Sofía's role as a wife. Each visit turned the household atmosphere into a quiet battlefield. Her words didn't just burden Sofía, they also suffocated Diego, who grew more withdrawn with every encounter. He started avoiding her, spending less time at home, and barely speaking when he was there. The emotional distance between them became undeniable. Their time together was now filled with silence and an invisible wall that seemed to grow taller by the day. Sofía felt it deeply, the coldness in their home, the fading warmth. The dream of a happy family blurred into a vague memory, as if each of them lived in a separate world. Surrounded by nonstop conflict and pressure, Sofía felt increasingly lost and weary. Her rising career could no longer fill the void in her heart. What was once supposed to be her place of peace, her family, had become the source of her deepest wounds and anxiety. She began to notice how Diego was drifting further away. Their short conversations turned awkward. His eyes avoided hers whenever she tried to connect. Gone were the tender smiles and gentle embraces. In their place was silence, heavy and cold. Diego avoided important conversations, dodged emotionally significant moments. And with every retreat, Sofía felt more and more excluded from his life. Deep in her heart, a quiet suspicion began to grow. The office gossip, Diego's emotional distance, his increasingly strange behavior, she couldn't help but wonder if there was someone else. She didn't have proof, not yet. But the feeling of betrayal gnawed at her, tightening her chest whenever she looked at him. She searched his eyes for answers, but all she found was evasiveness. This insecurity wasn't just a passing feeling, it gradually became an inseparable part of Sofía's life. It kept her from fully focusing on work or family, turning each day into a struggle against fear and doubt. Her emotional state became increasingly complex. She wanted to preserve her home, yet she was bracing herself for the possibility of facing a painful truth. Mercedes, Sofía's mother-in-law, was the main source of the growing suspicion and pressure on Diego. She constantly dropped insinuations and posed loaded questions every time she saw her son, making him feel stifled and controlled. Conversations with his mother were no longer gentle but had turned into tense mind games, wearing Diego down and pushing him deeper into silence. Sofía could feel the fracture between Diego and his mother, and even between herself and Diego, which was growing day by day. Diego wasn't open about his thoughts, but his behavior, the avoidance, the silence, the evasive glances, made it clear to Sofía that the distance between them wasn't just caused by family pressure. The signs of emotional distance, secrecy, and possibly an affair weighed on Sofía in silence. She found herself trapped between irreconcilable contradictions, a husband who seemed to be slipping away and an in-law family full of pressure and suspicion. Her mother-in-law's constant criticism made Sofía feel suffocated in an invisible vortex of pressure. Every time Mercedes showed up, the atmosphere in the house became oppressive. Her blaming remarks made Sofía feel as if everything was her fault, especially the fact that she hadn't had children yet and the growing rift between her and Diego. That pressure didn't just drain Sofía emotionally, it made her feel increasingly alone in her own home. Outside of the home, workplace gossip about Sofía and her boss, Martín, had also begun to spread, further wounding her and eroding her trust in her colleagues. The prying looks, the whispers behind her back, made her increasingly doubt herself, her worth, her role, both at work and in her family. Sofía was in a constant state of stress. At times, she felt utterly exhausted, as if she had no strength left to keep fighting the pressure from all sides. The loneliness and growing suspicion gnawed at her, leaving her confused and directionless. The weight of family and work bore down on her shoulders like a never-ending storm, slowly eroding her trust and her strength. One evening, when Diego said he had to meet clients for dinner, Sofía happened to notice a faint wine-colored lipstick stain on his shirt collar, something that couldn't possibly come from just a business dinner. She didn't say a word. She simply watched him leave the apartment, a coldness rising in her chest. The feeling of betrayal was no longer vague, it was real, present, and as clear as that lipstick stain. After that, small details began to piece themselves together in her mind. The unfamiliar perfume lingering on his shirts, the nights he came home late without texting, the phone always placed face down and locked with a fingerprint. Sofía had tried to rationalize it all, had tried to convince herself it was just work, stress, a temporary change. But the truth was becoming harder to deny. One day, while putting away Diego's coat, she found a restaurant receipt in the pocket, from Palermo, the same place where they had once celebrated their anniversary. But this time, the bill read table for two, dated the exact day Diego claimed to be on a business trip in La Plata. Sofía's heart sank, her entire body went cold. This wasn't suspicion anymore, it was proof. Her sense of trust shattered. Each day she looked at Diego with different eyes, ones filled with both pain and fury. What had once been love had become a question with no answer. When did it start? Sofía didn't confront him right away. But in silence, she began to prepare herself for the moment everything would fall apart. The anger inside her no longer simmered. It flared, fueled by the silent wounds she'd carried for months. One Friday afternoon, when Diego said he'd be home late because of an emergency meeting, Sofía didn't question him. She simply nodded and quietly called a taxi to follow him from the building. Her heart clenched with every turn as she watched Diego's car pull into a boutique hotel in Recoleta, the very hotel they'd once dreamed of visiting to celebrate their 10th anniversary. She waited. Every minute felt like an hour. 2 hours later, Diego emerged, with a tall woman with long brown hair, dressed professionally but walking closely beside him, with an air of intimacy. And Sofía didn't feel pain anymore, only emptiness. It wasn't a stranger. It was Clara, a former coworker of Diego's. The same Clara she'd once invited to his birthday party 3 years ago. The same Clara who used to laugh with them, who still sent Christmas cards every year. When she got home, Sofía said nothing. She waited until Diego walked in as if nothing had happened, took off his coat, and placed his keys on the table. She looked at him, her eyes cold and sharp, and said, "You're having an affair." Diego froze. He didn't have time to deny it, didn't make excuses. Only silence. He didn't defend himself. He didn't deny it. He just lowered his head, a silent admission. At that moment, the bedroom door opened. Mercedes was standing there. She had heard everything from start to finish. But instead of shock or anger toward her son, she looked at Sofía with icy indifference and said slowly, "Maybe if you'd done a better job as a wife, things would have turned out differently." That sentence was the final blow. Sofía stood there, not shedding a single tear. The truth was out, and what hurt more than the betrayal itself was the reaction of those who were supposed to be her family. The air in the apartment thickened after Sofía's accusation and Diego's prolonged silence. But what truly broke her wasn't the affair, It was that sentence from Mercedes, cold and final, like the verdict of an outsider who had always acted like a judge. Sofía turned toward her, eyes burning, her voice trembling with restrained fury. Are you excusing your son's betrayal? Mercedes crossed her arms, her expression calm but dripping with contempt. I'm not excusing it. I'm just saying a woman who's always focused on her career and neglects her family shouldn't be surprised when her husband turns elsewhere for someone who listens. Diego flinched. Mom, stop. But Sofía let out a bitter, choked laugh. Neglect? I just finished a 6-month negotiation that helped Diego retain part of his shares in the company. I've been covering most of our family's finances for the past 3 years. And what do I get in return? A mother-in-law who spies and nitpicks constantly instead of offering support. A weak husband who doesn't have the courage to stand up for his wife. Diego held her hand, trying to stay calm, but all he could muster was a weary sigh. I'm sorry. Sorry. Sofía nearly screamed. You betrayed me, let your mother humiliate me for years, and now you say sorry like you dropped a glass? Her gaze shifted to Mercedes. Her voice dropped, low and controlled. You never accepted me just because I didn't have a child right away, because I didn't stay home to cook. But what do you know about our marriage? Or did you only ever want a pretty little vase who knew how to obey? The air shattered with shouting, tears, and words that had been held back far too long. Diego stood between the two women, his wife and his mother, lost, unsure who to look at, what to say, whether to stay or to walk away. Sofía stepped back, as if afraid she'd lose control again. Get out of my house, she said, voice hoarse. Both of you. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a sentence. She didn't need another explanation, another tear. The marriage, and what they called a family, had ended that very night. The small apartment on the 14th floor fell silent after the emotional storm. Sofía's final words still echoed in Diego's mind. Get out of my house. Both of you. He didn't move. Mercedes stood tall, showing no hint of shame. She glanced at her son, then turned to Sofía. Let's go, Diego. Sofía stood at the end of the hallway, fists clenched. But her eyes weren't angry anymore. They were cold, resolute, as if every feeling had already been emptied out. Diego looked at his wife, then his mother. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but the only words that came out were, Sofía, this isn't as simple as you think. She laughed, a chilling, detached laugh. No, it's very simple. You choose, me or your mother. No explanations. No detours. A long silence. Diego turned to Mercedes, searching her eyes for agreement. She said nothing, just placed a hand on his shoulder. A small gesture, but full of power. Sofía watched like someone replaying an old film, a role she had exhausted herself playing for years. And now it was time to strip off the last bit of makeup. You still can't stand with me, she said quietly. Even when the truth is right in front of you. Even after I endured your mother for 7 years without a word of complaint. Diego stayed silent. His eyes dropped as he bent to pick up his coat, not daring to look back. When the door slammed shut behind them, Sofía stood frozen for a few seconds. Her heart pounded, not with regret, but with emptiness. There was no victory, no satisfaction. Just one clear thing. She had made her choice. And forced someone else to make theirs. Sofía walked to the window, looking down at the traffic below as if trying to reconnect with reality. The Buenos Aires night was thick and cold, but to her, it was a beginning. The next morning, the apartment was strangely quiet. No more Mercedes grumbling in the living room. No more Diego clattering around the kitchen, forgetting to add sugar to her coffee. Just Sofía and the whisper of wind outside the window, carrying away the faint dust of a collapsed life. She sat at the dining table. In front of her, an empty glass and an unopened newspaper. Buenos Aires sunlight streamed through the curtains, brilliant, but cold. She had kicked her husband and mother-in-law out of what was once called home. But this silence wasn't a triumph, it was the price of awakening. At the office, everything went on as usual. Martín greeted her with a cautious, probing look. Rumor had it Diego had taken a temporary leave, requesting a transfer to Mendoza, over 1,000 kilometers away from Buenos Aires. Sofía didn't ask, didn't comment. She threw herself into work like a machine, focused, precise, distant, as if it could fill the hollow inside her. But during quiet moments, she found herself staring at her phone, unlocking it, locking it again. No messages from Diego. No apologies. Not even a simple, "Are you okay?" Friends texted, some out of pity, others just curious. A few female colleagues quietly approached her, their eyes saying everything no words needed. They understood what it felt like to be crushed between a career, a mother-in-law, and a man too weak to protect you. That evening, Sofía pulled a bottle of Malbec from the wine cabinet, the one Diego had bought for their 3rd anniversary. She opened it, poured 2 glasses out of habit, then stared at the second glass for a long while before pouring it down the sink. There was no more us. Only me. She didn't cry. There was no need. Pain wasn't a surprise anymore. It had become a quiet, persistent roommate. But for the first time in years, she wasn't ashamed to face herself in the mirror. She knew she had done the right thing, even if the right thing often comes hand in hand with loneliness. A month passed since Sofía had thrown Diego out. Her life no longer revolved around tense dinners, invisible blame, and evasive glances. The apartment was now tidy and quiet, but it no longer felt suffocating. She turned one of the bedrooms into a home office, placed a monstera plant by the window, rehung the artwork, changed the curtains. Small things, but each one a quiet declaration that she was in control of her life again. Sofía called it her life reordering journey. Still, the outside world wasn't so forgiving. At work, there were still whispers behind her back, murmurs that she was being protected by the boss. Some were polite, but she could feel the cunning behind every check-in. She didn't bother denying anything. Any explanation would just make people think she was trying to cover up something real. The rumor about Diego moving to Mendoza reached her through a colleague. Sofía listened and smiled faintly, as if hearing the story of a stranger. He left, with his mother, leaving behind nothing but a wedding ring in a drawer and a few unpaid bills. On her husband's side, Mercedes sent a long, reproachful email. "You hurt Diego. You're not the kind of woman who knows how to keep a family together. A real wife would never throw her husband out like that." Sofía didn't respond. She had nothing left to say. That woman had never seen her as part of the family, just a vessel for childbirth, a pretext to control her son. Then, one Friday afternoon, Sofía parked in front of a small cafe on Charcas Street, where she used to go with Diego back when they were dating. But she wasn't there for nostalgia. She had an appointment with an old college friend, Anna, now a licensed therapist. They hadn't seen each other in 10 years. In the soft lighting and background jazz, Sofía spoke of her pain, of the things she'd never dared admit to anyone. Not to complain, but to understand. She realized she hadn't fallen apart. She was just learning how to stand with a heart torn to pieces. That weekend night, Sofía sat alone on the balcony, a glass of Malbec in hand, as the breeze from the Rio de la Plata rustled through the jacaranda trees, scattering purple petals across the sidewalk below. From her 7th-floor apartment, everything down there seemed smaller, couples walking hand in hand, the distant hum of a bus, music from the next-door unit. She no longer felt like she belonged to anyone's world. And for once, that didn't scare her. The divorce was quick. Diego didn't put up a fight, didn't argue over assets, didn't even apologize. He just sent a curt message late one night. "You win." But Sofía didn't feel like she had won. There was no joy in collapse. Only a sense of lightness, like shrugging off a heavy backpack after a long, punishing hike. And just like that, she realized the hardest part wasn't forgiving Diego, it was forgiving herself. Forgiving herself for staying too long. For trying so hard, she forgot she was a person, too. One morning, she woke up and didn't check her phone. Didn't stress about a meeting. Didn't flinch at the thought of a message from her mother-in-law. That, she realized, was freedom. Not dazzling, not glorious, but real. She went to a bookstore and bought a novel she'd wanted to read 5 years ago but had no time for. She started learning French again, just so she could read Baudelaire in the original. She let herself cry and laugh whenever she needed to. There were long, empty nights when the silence in the apartment was maddening. But after those nights came mornings where sunlight filtered through the curtains and a quiet voice from within whispered, "I'm still alive." Freedom didn't mean it no longer hurt. It simply meant Sofía had stopped hurting herself. Near the end of spring, on a quiet Friday afternoon, Sofía received a strange, untitled email. The sender used an anonymous Gmail address, no profile photo. The message was just one sentence. Martín knew about Diego's affair and kept silent. Her heart stopped. She reread the line over and over, trying to decide if it was some kind of cruel prank. Attached to the message was an audio file, a recording from over a year ago. In it, she recognized Martín's voice, low and composed, as always speaking with a woman. The other voice, unmistakably, was Mercedes. "I know Diego is doing the wrong thing, but Sofía's on the rise. She's extremely valuable to the company. We can't let personal matters ruin everything. I just hope you don't let it affect him. Sofía's just a phase. Diego will come back." Sofía's head spun. In an instant, all the old moments rushed back, Martín's loaded glances, the times he dodged questions when she mentioned Diego, the nagging feeling that she was being kept not for her talent, but for her value. Turns out she wasn't just the victim of a marital betrayal, she was a pawn in a game she never even knew she was playing. Martín's silence wasn't out of respect. It was strategic. And Mercedes, the woman who had stood in her kitchen, criticizing her cooking, her glances, was the same one whispering behind her back with Sofía's boss, sacrificing her daughter-in-law's dignity to protect her fragile son. Shock. Anger. But then, Sofía sat still. For the first time in all of this, she didn't cry. She simply smiled. "Thank you," she whispered, and deleted the email. No reply. No confrontation. She didn't need it anymore. The past had played its final card. And she had walked away from the table.